My name is Arabella Finch. I'm 26 years old, and it's 2025 here in London. I never imagined that a single wedding would make me question everything, my worth, my place, and how the world truly sees me. That night, people laughed at me for a simple, modest dress. They thought I was ordinary, invisible. But what they didn't know was that I had a secret, one they could never see coming. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happens next will change everything. And if you love real-life cinematic stories like this, hit subscribe so you never miss one. The moment I stepped into the grand hall, my heart felt like it might leap out of my chest. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, scattering light across polished marble floors, while the scent of roses and perfume wrapped the room in luxury. Every eye turned toward me, not in welcome, but in curiosity, thinly veiled judgment, and the faintest hint of amusement. I wore a simple pale blue dress. Delicate, modest, nothing branded, nothing flashy, just a dress my mother would have smiled at. Yet, in this room full of wealth and elegance, it marked me as an outsider. "Oh, that's her," I caught a whisper from someone across the room. "She actually wore that," another voice muttered. Their words felt like ice against my skin. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept walking, every step measured, deliberate, as if to say, I am here. I belong just as much as anyone else. I could feel their stares, their silent laughter, their assumptions about who I was, too simple, too modest, too ordinary. And yet inside, I was anything but ordinary. I had built my life quietly, carefully, away from the eyes of people who thought they understood me. The car parked outside my apartment that day, the long nights of hard work, the promotions I'd earned in silence, the apartment downtown with panoramic views of the Thames, none of it was known to anyone here. No one had glimpsed the real Arabella Finch. Not yet. I moved through the crowd, catching fleeting glances from people I had once called acquaintances. The familiar sting of judgment lingered, classmates, distant cousins, colleagues who had smiled politely while writing me off. The voices in my mind repeated what they always had. "You'll never fit in. You'll never belong." But tonight, everything was about to change. I paused near the punch table, letting my eyes scan the room. Someone tried to meet my gaze, a woman whose smile had always been polite but pointed, judgment lingering just beneath the surface. I returned the glance with calm, quiet confidence. Then I heard it, a man I knew from work leaning toward a companion, whispering, "Is that the Finch girl? I thought she worked somewhere small." His words were faint but deliberate, cutting. I smiled, not nervously, not apologetically, but knowingly. Every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of persistence had led me to this. I was ready. The speeches began, the room buzzing with polite conversation. I drifted toward the balcony, needing a moment, taking in the London skyline as dusk painted the city in gold and silver. I let the cool evening air fill my lungs, centering myself. I reminded myself why I was here. No one had seen the real Arabella Finch before. They had only seen the version they wanted to see, quiet, modest, unremarkable. Tonight, that version would vanish. I returned inside just as the bride and groom shared their first dance. Guests mingled, drinks in hand, smiles plastered across faces that didn't reach their eyes. I moved through the crowd with measured grace, fully aware of the currents swirling around me, unnoticed yet intentional. And then I saw it, my car, sleek black, polished like liquid obsidian, waiting outside. A symbol of what I had quietly achieved, what they could not have imagined. As I stepped into view, conversations faltered. Eyes widened, glasses paused midair. Whispers filled the air. "Is that? She drives that." I stepped down with deliberate poise, letting the car speak for me. This was not vanity. This was evidence. Evidence that their assumptions had been wrong, that the woman they laughed at could command respect without uttering a word. A woman who had been particularly cruel with her whispers muttered softly, I had no idea." I didn't reply. Words were unnecessary. The look in my eyes, the quiet confidence, the car shimmering in the soft light, it said everything. I belonged here just as much as anyone else. And maybe, in a way, I belonged more. Yet even as satisfaction coursed through me, a subtle unease threaded through my chest. Not fear, but curiosity. How would they respond? Admiration? Resentment? Something else entirely. Then I saw someone across the hall, someone whose approval I had secretly sought, someone whose opinion mattered far more than any of the guests. They were watching me, calculating, eyes narrowed. I forced a casual smile, but my pulse raced. This night was far from over. The lights flickered above, shadows stretching like whispers across the polished floors. I knew the murmurs weren't finished, the judgments weren't complete. And then, a voice I hadn't expected called my name, cutting through the room like a knife. I froze, heart pounding, and turned slowly. What I saw next would change everything. The voice echoed across the hall, slicing through the polite chatter like a sudden gust of wind. Arabella. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed, my heart thundering in my chest. Slowly, I turned toward the sound. There, standing near the grand staircase, was someone I hadn't expected, someone whose opinion had silently haunted me for years. Julian Harcourt. Julian, with his tailored suit and the faintest smirk, had always been part of that exclusive circle that dismissed me. He had observed me once, subtly, almost imperceptibly, yet his approval, or disapproval, had mattered. I hadn't anticipated him noticing me tonight. He stepped closer, voice calm, but carrying that familiar edge. I never thought I'd see you here like this. I smiled, a delicate, measured smile, letting the weight of my presence speak before any words. I suppose surprises are easier than people think, I replied softly, eyes never leaving his. Around me, the room had quieted. Guests who had been chatting or checking their phones now watched, some with disbelief, others with curiosity. My simple dress, once a source of ridicule, now seemed insignificant. The car, the confidence, the calm poise, I had shifted the narrative without a single argument. Julian's expression flickered, curiosity, surprise, a hint of something unreadable. He raised a perfectly arched brow. You've changed. Yes, I said simply, I have. Inside, a mix of satisfaction and anticipation coursed through me. I had worked for this moment quietly, without boasting, without needing anyone's validation. And now, the room was witnessing it firsthand. Yet, even as I spoke, a sense of tension settled over me. Not everyone would take this gracefully. The murmurs of guests began to rise, whispers carrying a mix of admiration and envy. The subtle shift of social power was tangible in the air. I moved closer to the dance floor, letting Julian watch, letting others notice. Every step measured, every glance deliberate. This was my declaration. I had arrived. Then, as the music swelled softly, a woman I had once considered a friend stepped forward, her face a mixture of shock and irritation. Arabella, I didn't know, she began, but her voice faltered under the weight of my calm gaze. I inclined my head politely. It's all right, most people don't. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and I realized admiration wasn't the only reaction I would see tonight. Some would resent this sudden shift, some would feel threatened. But that was their burden, not mine. Julian's gaze followed mine, and for a moment I saw an understanding flicker across his features. Perhaps even respect. Or maybe calculation. Either way, it didn't matter. Tonight, I owned my story. I drifted toward the balcony again, needing to breathe. London sprawled beneath me, lights twinkling like stars brought to earth. For a moment, I allowed myself to reflect. The journey to this point hadn't been easy. Every long night, every challenge faced alone, every dismissive remark I had absorbed in silence, all of it had led here. And yet, even in this triumph, a small unease lingered. The moment someone noticed your strength, they start to test it. I could feel it in the subtle shifts of posture around me, the quiet whispers. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Returning inside, I saw Julian again. He approached, steps slow, deliberate. Arabella, this isn't just about tonight, is it? He asked quietly, almost as if he were testing the waters. I smiled faintly. No, it is. Tonight is just the beginning. He nodded, a faint smirk returning. I thought as much. I suppose we'll see how the others handle it. Before I could respond, a sudden movement drew my attention. Across the hall, someone else I hadn't noticed before was speaking in low tones to a small group of guests, eyes darting toward me. My pulse quickened. This person wasn't just a casual observer, they were a strategist, someone who had influence, and their interest in me was not neutral. A chill ran through me, not of fear, but anticipation. The evening had started with laughter at a simple dress. It had evolved into whispers at the car, stolen glances, and finally, tension that hummed in the very air. And now it seemed someone had plans. I knew instinctively the story was far from over. Tonight, perception had shifted, yes, but influence and power were complicated things. One misstep, one wrong move, and everything I had built could be questioned. The music played softly, masking the subtle undertones of plotting and calculation. I moved closer to Julian, letting him observe my confidence, my calm. But inside, my mind was racing, calculating the possibilities, considering how to maintain the advantage I had earned. Then a voice, low but commanding, reached my ears from across the room. It wasn't a whisper, but it was intentional, directed. "Arabella Finch, we need to talk." My stomach tightened. The room seemed to pause, every guest caught in the tension that suddenly thickened the air. I took a deep breath, masking my anticipation, and prepared myself. Whoever this was, they had chosen the perfect moment. And I had a choice: confront, respond, or let the situation unfold. I stepped toward the source of the voice, calm on the outside, alert on the inside. Every guest now watching, every eye following my movement. I could feel the weight of expectation pressing down. And then, the figure stepped into the light. And in that moment, I realized that tonight was not just about proving myself to the crowd. It was about facing a challenge I had never anticipated, someone who could shake everything I had carefully constructed. A faint smile tugged at my lips, a mix of excitement and resolve. This was the turning point. This was the moment where perception, reality, and influence would collide. And deep inside, I knew nothing would ever be the same after this encounter. The voice that had called me had not been mistaken, and as I approached, the figure came into full view. She was tall, poised, every inch the commanding presence that I had expected from someone used to controlling the room. Elizabeth Hawthorne, a woman whose approval I had once sought, whose judgment had haunted me quietly. And now, here she was, stepping toward me with an expression that could slice through steel. "Arabella," she said, voice measured, almost clinical. "A word, please." I nodded, keeping my composure. The guests around us seemed to shrink into the background, their whispers fading as if the room itself had acknowledged the tension. "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone calm, deliberate. We moved to a quieter corner of the hall, the soft hum of music and chatter muffled by distance but still present, like an undercurrent of society's pulse. I studied her carefully. Elizabeth was evaluating me, her eyes sharp, assessing not just what I had accomplished, but who I had become. "I must admit," she began, tilting her head slightly, "I did not expect to see you here tonight like this." I let a small, controlled smile play on my lips. "And what is like this, exactly?" I asked, voice steady. She raised a brow, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Confident, commanding, dangerous even." The word hung in the air between us. Dangerous. I had never thought of myself in that way, at least not in the sense she meant, yet I understood it perfectly. This was no longer a simple social evening. This was a test of perception, influence, and control. And Elizabeth was the first to set the rules. "I suppose," I said softly, "that some people prefer to underestimate what they cannot control." Her eyes flickered, ever so slightly, betraying a reaction she tried to hide. "Perhaps, or perhaps some people do not like being surprised." I allowed silence to stretch for a moment, letting my presence fill the space. I had learned early in life that confidence could speak louder than words, and tonight, every glance, every movement was intentional. Then she leaned slightly closer, voice dropping. "You have changed, Arabella, but the question is, have you changed enough to navigate this world?" Her words were subtle, almost a challenge. But beneath the polite tone, I sensed the test she had set. She wanted to see not just my composure, but how I would respond under scrutiny. "I've changed as much as I needed to," I replied carefully, "and I've learned that the world only respects what it cannot ignore." Her gaze sharpened, and I felt a flicker of admiration, or perhaps grudging respect, in her eyes. But the unspoken tension remained. Elizabeth was not merely acknowledging my presence. She was measuring it, calculating its impact on the delicate social dynamics of the evening. As we spoke, I became aware of others observing us from a distance. Julian, still near the staircase, had shifted slightly, a quiet interest in his posture. Others whispered in hushed tones, their curiosity piqued. The room had become a stage, and every action, every word carried weight. Elizabeth's expression softened just slightly, and then she smiled faintly. "I see you've done well for yourself, but this is London society, Arabella. Success alone does not guarantee acceptance." Her words were not meant to threaten, but they carried a truth I could not ignore. Tonight, I had proved that appearances were deceiving, that judgment based on dress or demeanor was flawed. Yet Elizabeth reminded me that perception and influence were complex, and navigating them required more than just success. I nodded, acknowledging her point. "I understand, but I've never been interested in acceptance alone. I prefer recognition for what I am capable of." She tilted her head, studying me for a moment longer, then stepped back, a subtle shift in the tension. "Very well," she said. "Consider this your first test. The night is far from over, Arabella. There are others who will challenge what you've shown tonight, some openly, some in ways you might not anticipate." Her words sent a quiet thrill through me. Challenges had always been my motivator, the fuel that had driven my ambition. And tonight, as much as I had arrived, I knew that this was only the beginning. I glanced back at the crowd, the guests observing, whispering, reacting to every movement, every glance. The room seemed alive with expectation, curiosity, and subtle competition. And in that living tableau, I realized that my success was not a destination, but a stage upon which the next act of the evening would unfold. A sudden movement at the far side of the hall caught my attention. Someone I had not anticipated, a figure known for influence, known for wielding social power with precision, was approaching. Their eyes were fixed on me, evaluating, calculating. The thrill of anticipation surged through me, tempered with the awareness that tonight could tilt in any direction. Elizabeth's words echoed in my mind. The night is far from over. I straightened, composed, letting a quiet confidence radiate from my posture. Every step I took toward the approaching figure carried intention. Every glance I cast, every movement I made, was a statement of who I was. And as the figure drew closer, I realized that this evening, which had begun with laughter at a simple dress, had transformed into a stage of influence, perception, and subtle power plays. Every guest was a spectator, every action a move in a larger game, and I was no longer the one to be underestimated. The approaching figure stopped just a few feet from me, and in a voice low enough for only me to hear, said something that made my pulse quicken. "Arabella Finch, you've done well to arrive here unnoticed, but tonight, some truths cannot remain hidden for long." I froze. The air seemed to thicken, the music fading into the background as the weight of those words settled over me. There was a challenge here, one I had not anticipated, and it was about to unfold in ways that could change everything I had built. I took a slow, deliberate breath, keeping my composure as the figure stepped closer. Their eyes locked onto mine, unwavering, and for the first time tonight, I felt a true test of my resolve. Whoever this was, they knew something I didn't, and they intended for me to react. "Arabella," the voice continued, soft but commanding, "tonight isn't just about appearances or success or proving anyone wrong. There are things you've hidden, choices you've made, and people who will not forgive you easily. They've been waiting for an opening." A shiver ran down my spine, not of fear, but anticipation. My pulse quickened, my mind racing through possibilities. Who in this room could hold such influence, and what could they want from me? I maintained a calm exterior, letting a subtle smile ease across my face. "I've learned," I said carefully, "that the world rewards those who are prepared. If someone wishes to challenge me, I'll face it, but I do not fear it. The figure's expression remained unreadable, a faint hint of approval perhaps, or maybe calculation. Good, they replied, because the night has only begun. There are whispers already, some admiring, some envious, and some who will seek to undermine you. I nodded, acknowledging the warning, my mind moving rapidly. Every social gathering, every gathering of high society, had its currents and undercurrents. And tonight, I was in the center of a tide I had only just begun to understand. From the corner of my eye, I saw Julian observing silently, his posture composed but his expression thoughtful. Elizabeth remained near, poised, as if she were waiting to see how I would navigate this new threat. The room hummed with a subtle tension, every guest now fully aware of the shifting dynamics. I took a step forward, letting my presence command the space. "Then let them come," I said quietly, my voice firm. "I've spent too long being underestimated. Tonight I won't just prove myself, I'll ensure no one forgets who I am." The mysterious figure nodded once, a gesture almost imperceptible, but enough to signal that they were satisfied with my response. Then, without another word, they melted back into the crowd, leaving me with a pulse racing in anticipation and the knowledge that challenges lay ahead. I turned back toward the center of the room, letting the evening continue while I subtly recalculated my position. Guests were still watching, murmuring, their eyes darting between me and the others. I knew I had made an impact, a real, undeniable impression. But the warning lingered. Someone had already set their sights on testing me. The rest of the night unfolded with measured steps. I mingled, engaged in polite conversation, and let subtle hints of my success ripple through interactions. People who had once mocked me now approached with cautious admiration. I smiled, thanked them, and moved on not out of arrogance, but out of the calm confidence of someone who had earned her place. Yet, as the evening drew on, I couldn't shake the sense that tonight's events were merely the opening act. Somewhere in the room, plans were forming, strategies unfolding, and eyes were watching my every move. The whispers that had once amused me now carried weight. They were not idle gossip. They were a subtle warning that even success could be challenged. Then, as the bride and groom thanked guests for attending, the figure returned. Not openly, but a faint movement from across the hall caught my attention. They were watching me still, evaluating, waiting. And in that glance, I understood that this challenge was far from over. I felt a surge of determination, the thrill of anticipation mingling with the calm focus I had cultivated over the years. Every step, every glance, every subtle movement would matter in the hours to come. This was not just a social gathering. It was a test of influence, perception, and resilience. And just as I was gathering my thoughts, a soft murmur rose from the crowd, a comment, a whispered speculation, a reaction I hadn't anticipated. Heads turned, eyes widened, and I realized someone had just revealed a detail about me, something personal, something that could shift the balance of perception in an instant. I froze for a heartbeat, letting the moment stretch. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the hum of conversation carrying the tension like an invisible current. And then I smiled, not nervously, not defensively, but knowingly. Whatever had been whispered, I could handle it. I had prepared for moments like this my entire life. The figure across the hall watched closely, a faint smirk tugging at their lips. It was clear they had expected a reaction, but instead, I gave calm, confidence, and the quiet certainty that no one tonight would be able to undermine me without consequence. The music swelled again, a subtle reminder of the world moving around us, yet I felt entirely separate from it, aware, alert, in command of my own presence. And in that awareness, a deep, quiet satisfaction settled in my chest. Tonight, I had begun to rewrite the story of who I was in this room. The laughter, the judgment, the dismissive glances, they had all been replaced with curiosity, respect, and a faint trace of unease. And yet, the night was not over. The whispers, the evaluations, the subtle challenges, they were only beginning. I took a slow, deliberate step back, letting the room breathe, letting others react, letting influence and perception continue their silent dance. And I knew deep inside that this was only the beginning of a longer journey, a journey of proving, of navigating, and ultimately of triumph. And then, just as I began to relax, the mysterious figure approached once more, closer this time, and in a voice low enough for only me to hear, they said, "Arabella Finch, you've made an impression tonight, but impressions can be fragile. Be ready, the next move is coming, and it will test everything you've built." I froze, pulse quickening, knowing that whatever lay ahead would challenge me in ways I had not yet imagined. The room continued around us, oblivious to the tension crackling between us. And in that moment, I realized the real story of tonight had just begun. The next morning, London was quiet, almost serene, a stark contrast to the storm that had brewed the night before. I stood by my apartment window, watching the city stretch beneath me, lights fading into the soft glow of dawn. The events at the wedding replayed in my mind like a film, the laughter, the whispers, the looks of surprise when they finally saw me for who I truly was. But the thrill of triumph had been tempered by a quiet awareness. Someone in that room had taken notice, someone with influence, someone who had not only acknowledged my presence but intended to challenge it. The mysterious figure's words lingered in my mind. "Be ready, the next move is coming." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the bitter warmth ground me. The truth was clear. Tonight had been a victory, but victories in this world were only as strong as the next challenge. I had to anticipate, strategize, and remain several steps ahead. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages I had received overnight. Most were congratulatory, polite, the usual social niceties. But a single message stood out, brief and precise. "Meet me tonight. We need to discuss the wedding. There are things you must know. E." Elizabeth. Of course it was Elizabeth. I hadn't anticipated direct contact so soon, but I had expected her involvement. The question was, what truths did she intend to reveal, and how would they impact the fragile perception I had carefully constructed? The hours passed quickly. I reviewed my plans, dressed deliberately, choosing an outfit that spoke of confidence without extravagance. Subtle, commanding, understated, everything I had learned about influence applied tonight. Every detail mattered. As I arrived at the venue Elizabeth had chosen, an exclusive private lounge in Mayfair, I felt the familiar mix of anticipation and resolve. The room was dimly lit, elegant, with plush furnishings and soft music that hinted at discretion. I wasn't the only one waiting. Elizabeth was already there, standing near a window, her posture poised, hands folded lightly. "Arabella," she said, turning to face me, her expression unreadable. "I see you've arrived as expected." "Yes," I replied, maintaining calm. "And you mentioned there were things I should know." She gestured for me to sit. Indeed, tonight was merely an introduction, a test of perception. But the people in that room, some of them, are not satisfied with appearances. They have histories, influence, and intentions that could disrupt everything you've built. I nodded slowly, absorbing her words. The implication was clear. My presence had shifted dynamics, but there were forces already at work, people whose motivations I could not yet see. "Who are they?" I asked, voice steady. Elizabeth's gaze sharpened. "One in particular," she said, leaning closer. "A rival from your past, someone who underestimated you, dismissed you, and now sees an opportunity to challenge your position. You need to be prepared for more than whispers and glances. Strategy will be required." I leaned back slightly, letting her words sink in. My mind raced, replaying faces, recalling gestures, subtleties that I might have missed. London society was a delicate balance, and I had just stepped onto a stage where every move could have consequences. "Then tell me everything," I said, determination threading through my voice. "I need to understand the scope of this challenge." Elizabeth's expression softened just slightly, a hint of approval passing over her features. "Patience, Arabella. The details will reveal themselves. But remember this, appearances can mislead. Influence is subtle, power is often invisible, and perception is everything. Tonight, you must observe, anticipate, and act when necessary." I felt a surge of focus. Challenges had always been my fuel, driving me to work harder, think sharper, and act with precision. and tonight I would need every ounce of that skill. The evening began with understated introductions, polite conversation, and careful observation. Every guest was a potential informant, every glance a clue. And through it all, I remained poised, letting my confidence radiate without arrogance, speaking only when necessary, listening when others revealed more than they intended. Then, across the room, I saw him, the rival Elizabeth had hinted at. A man whose dismissal had haunted me years ago, whose laughter I had long remembered, and whose presence now carried a subtle threat. He watched me, calculating, eyes sharp. The challenge was clear. He had underestimated me once, and now he intended to see if his assumptions still held weight. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to show recognition beyond the polite nod I offered. Every detail mattered: posture, expression, tone of voice. The game had begun, silent, unspoken, yet palpably intense. Elizabeth's words echoed: observe, anticipate, act. I took a measured step toward the center of the room, letting my presence command attention without demanding it. Every eye turned subtly toward me, whispers threading through the air. The rival shifted slightly, adjusting his stance, acknowledging that I was no longer the same person they had once known. The room felt alive, charged with expectation. Influence, perception, and subtle maneuvering were now the game, and I was fully immersed. I knew the coming hours would test my strategy, my composure, and my ability to navigate this intricate web of power. And just as I felt the first spark of opportunity, a message arrived on my phone, brief, urgent. They know more than you think, be careful. E. A chill ran through me, anticipation mingling with resolve. The evening had begun with whispers, moved through tension, and now teetered on the edge of revelation. Someone had plans, and Arabella Finch was at the center of them. I straightened, a quiet smile playing on my lips. Challenges had always been my strength. Tonight, I would need every skill I possessed, every ounce of strategy I had cultivated over the years. And somewhere across the room, the rival watched, unaware that I was already 3 steps ahead. The rival's gaze lingered across the room, sharp and calculating, and I knew that the first real challenge of the evening was about to begin. Every social gathering, every polite conversation, could now carry hidden meaning. I had to act with precision, or the advantage I had carefully gained could slip away. I took a deliberate step closer to a group of guests, subtly positioning myself where my rival could observe without realizing I was guiding the narrative. Every laugh, every exchange, every casual gesture was intentional. I allowed snippets of conversation to reach his ears, carefully chosen words hinting at recent successes, subtle achievements he had not witnessed. A gentle smile played across my lips as I overheard one guest remarking, "Arabella's really made a name for herself, hasn't she?" Another nodded in agreement, adding, "It's impressive how she carries herself, confident, poised." I felt satisfaction ripple through me. Influence was as much about perception as reality, and tonight I was carefully shaping both. But I knew subtlety alone would not be enough. I needed to provoke a reaction, to measure the rival's intent and capabilities. I let my eyes meet his across the room. He hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but enough to confirm that he was paying attention. Then I allowed a small misstep, a calculated vulnerability. I laughed softly at a joke, tilting my head slightly, letting my guard appear momentarily relaxed. The rival's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. He had expected either fear, avoidance, or the polite distance of someone cautious. Instead, he found calm confidence, curiosity, and subtle command. I moved closer, engaging in polite conversation with others, but all the while my peripheral vision tracked him. He made a move, stepping toward a group I had just left, his posture deliberate. He was testing me, probing the space, seeking weaknesses or inconsistencies. Elizabeth watched from across the room, a faint smile on her lips. She understood the game, she had warned me, and her silent presence was both reassurance and subtle challenge. She had positioned herself as observer, letting me navigate this new stage, but always close enough to guide if necessary. The rival approached a guest who had overheard my subtle hints about my accomplishments. His words were measured, polite, but there was an undercurrent of challenge. Interesting, isn't it? How some people arrive quietly, yet suddenly seem everywhere at once. The guest laughed lightly, unsure, hesitant, and I could see the shift in attention subtly, like currents beneath the surface. I stepped back into the circle, maintaining calm composure, and offered a quiet, controlled smile. "I suppose it depends on perspective," I said. The rival's eyes met mine again, sharp and assessing, and I realized that the game had begun in earnest. This was not about appearances or wealth, but about control, influence, and perception. Every move mattered. Every reaction counted. Then something unexpected happened. A whispered comment, a subtle slip, reached my ears from someone observing the interactions. "Did you hear? Arabella. Been involved in projects most of us wouldn't even dream of." The rival's expression shifted immediately, a flicker of recognition, curiosity, perhaps concern. He had underestimated the depth of my achievements. He had seen success, but he had not seen the full story. I allowed the moment to linger, letting the information settle without confirming or denying. Subtlety was my ally, observation my weapon. I could see the rival's mind working, recalculating, reassessing. The first strike had been made, and the effect was immediate. Elizabeth's voice, soft but audible only to me, broke through my concentration. "Good, you've made your move. Now watch carefully, their reactions will tell you more than words ever could." I nodded slightly, focusing on the patterns, the subtle shifts in posture, the brief exchanges of glances, the micro-expressions that betrayed intent. This was a social battlefield, and I was both strategist and participant. The rival approached once more, this time with direct engagement. "Arabella," he said, voice calm but carrying an unmistakable challenge, "it seems I've underestimated you, but we both know this isn't just about tonight. There are histories, connections, and influence that can't be ignored." I met his gaze steadily, tone deliberate and unwavering. "I'm aware, and I've prepared for more than tonight. If influence and perception are the game, I intend to play it well and win." A faint smirk crossed his lips, and he tilted his head, intrigued. "We shall see," he replied, stepping back, but the tension remained. He was clearly impressed, but he would not yield. Not yet. I allowed a quiet moment of observation, letting the interactions around us continue, the guests unaware of the subtle power struggle unfolding. Every glance, every whisper, every calculated movement had meaning. The game was far from over, but I had made the first strategic move, and it had already unsettled him. Then, a soft ping from my phone broke the focus of the room. A message from Elizabeth. "Well done, but be ready, the next test is coming. They're not finished, and neither is the night." I smiled faintly, pocketing the phone, feeling a surge of anticipation. Challenges had always fueled me, and this was no different. The rival was clever, observant, and experienced, but I had strategy, preparation, and calm. The music swelled once again, soft and deliberate, masking the undercurrents of tension, but I felt it all, every subtle movement, every whispered calculation. London society was alive with perception, and tonight I was not just surviving, I was shaping it. And just as I began to settle into this rhythm, a subtle movement caught my attention at the far side of the room, a figure approaching, familiar yet unexpected. The air shifted slightly, tension mounting. This was someone who could change the game entirely, someone whose presence would demand a response. I straightened, pulse quickening, ready for whatever challenge was about to unfold. The night had begun with whispers, escalated with observation, and now teetered on the edge of revelation. The soft murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the distant laughter created a comfortable hum around me, but I was acutely aware that the true game had only just begun. Every glance, every whispered comment, every casual gesture could carry weight tonight, and I had to remain several steps ahead. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw someone approaching, deliberate, calm, familiar. Not a rival this time, but an unexpected ally. A figure I had once trusted, someone whose judgment had always been sound, whose advice had proven invaluable in past challenges, Marcus Albright. "Arabella," he said softly as he arrived at my side, a reassuring presence amidst the subtle chaos of the room. "I heard about the evening. You handled it well, but there's more to come and you need to be prepared." I nodded, grateful for his steady calm. "I know," I replied. "The rival is already probing, testing the waters, and now it seems someone else is about to enter the game." Marcus glanced toward the far side of the room, where a figure moved with quiet precision, catching the attention of several guests. "That's who I was warning you about," he said. "They have influence, connections, and the ability to sway opinion quickly. You'll need to anticipate their moves carefully." I took a slow, deliberate breath. This was no longer about appearances, luxury cars, or initial impressions. Tonight was about perception, influence, and the subtle power plays that governed this world. I had prepared for challenges, but this required finesse, observation, and strategy at a higher level. We moved closer to the center of the room together, blending seamlessly with the other guests, observing the subtle shifts in posture, the stolen glances, the tiny micro-expressions that revealed intent. Marcus whispered, "Notice how people react to her presence. That's your first clue perception is a tool you can wield." I nodded, letting the guidance sink in while maintaining my composed exterior. Every step, every word, every laugh I offered was deliberate, calculated to influence and observe simultaneously. Then the rival from earlier stepped forward again, his expression a mixture of intrigue and challenge. He had observed my interactions with Marcus and clearly recognized that alliances could shift the balance of influence. His eyes narrowed slightly, subtle tension threading through his posture. I allowed a small, knowing smile to touch my lips. "It seems tonight is full of surprises," I said quietly, letting the words float into his awareness without revealing strategy or vulnerability. He raised a brow, acknowledging the subtle power play, then stepped back, observing, recalculating. The room, unaware of the undercurrents, continued its social dance, but I could feel the shift. Influence was being tested, alliances quietly forming, perceptions subtly changing. A soft notification from my phone drew my attention briefly. A message from Elizabeth. "You're handling it well, but stay alert. Influence can change in an instant, and tonight may have more surprises than you anticipate." I pocketed the phone, a quiet thrill of anticipation running through me. Elizabeth's words reminded me that vigilance was essential. The game was far from over, and subtlety was my greatest weapon. As the evening continued, I began to orchestrate small interactions, polite engagement with influential guests, subtle hints of my accomplishments, careful observation of reactions. Every move was designed to reinforce my presence, test responses, and gauge intentions. Then, across the room, the unexpected figure began to interact with the rival. Their conversation was brief, hushed, but I could sense the ripple effect almost immediately. Guests nearby shifted subtly, whispers rose quietly, and attention moved like a tide across the room. I realized instantly, this was a test of perception and influence, a chess game of subtle moves and hidden intentions. And I needed to act carefully, decisively, without revealing my strategy prematurely. Marcus leaned close, voice low. "That's the moment. Observe, anticipate, and guide the next move. The key is not to react emotionally, but to direct the flow subtly." I nodded, heart steady, pulse controlled. The evening had become a dance of strategy, perception, and subtle power. Every glance, every whispered word, every tiny gesture carried weight, and I was fully immersed in navigating it. Then, a sudden movement from the far side of the room caught my attention. The unexpected figure had shifted toward me, breaking the subtle barrier that had existed. The air thickened with tension, and I felt the weight of anticipation press down. This was the first direct engagement, the moment where observation turned into action. I straightened, meeting their gaze calmly. The room seemed to fade slightly around us, attention narrowing to the two of us. The subtle undercurrent of influence, power, and perception pulsed visibly, a tangible force threading through the crowd. The figure spoke softly, deliberately. "Arabella Finch, I've been observing your progress tonight. You've handled yourself well. But now it's time for the real test. Are you prepared to prove that perception and influence are more than appearances?" I felt a thrill of anticipation, tempered with calm focus. "I've been preparing for this moment for years," I replied, voice steady, "and I intend to meet the challenge fully." The figure's eyes flickered, respect, calculation, intrigue. "Good," they said, stepping back slightly, "because the next stage begins now and everything you've orchestrated will be tested." I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension ease into purpose. The night had evolved from whispers and observation to strategy and subtle confrontation. Influence, perception, and power were all in play, and I was ready. And then, just as I began to adjust to the flow, Marcus nudged my arm gently, nodding toward the rival and the unexpected figure. His eyes conveyed a simple, urgent message. The real challenge had begun. I straightened, pulse steady, mind focused. Tonight was no longer about appearances. Tonight was about influence, perception, and the quiet assertion of control, and Arabella Finch was ready to navigate it fully. The tension in the room had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, but I felt it in every fiber of my being. The unexpected figure, calm yet deliberate, had positioned themselves where everyone could see, yet no one truly noticed the undercurrent of power flowing through their stance. I knew this was the test Elizabeth had hinted at, the first real confrontation where observation alone would not suffice. Marcus leaned close, whispering, "This is it, Arabella. Every move you've made tonight has led to this. Watch carefully, respond deliberately, and control what you can." I nodded, keeping my posture calm, letting a quiet confidence radiate. Every glance, every subtle gesture was part of the strategy. Influence tonight was as much about perception as it was about action, and I had learned to wield both with precision. The figure's eyes met mine, unwavering, and I felt the subtle pulse of challenge in their gaze. Then, softly, almost a murmur to the room, they said, "Arabella Finch, you've impressed many tonight, but influence is more than appearances, and perception is only as strong as the foundation beneath it. Are you prepared to act when it matters most?" A thrill ran through me. This wasn't a question to be answered with words alone. It was a challenge demanding strategy, composure, and timing. I allowed a small, deliberate smile, letting the room feel the calm assertion of confidence without arrogance. "I am," I replied evenly, "and I intend to demonstrate that substance is more powerful than perception alone." The figure inclined their head slightly, approving the subtle assertion. Then, without breaking eye contact, they gestured toward the rival, who had been observing silently, calculating, and waiting for an opening. It was a delicate dance, one I had rehearsed in my mind countless times, but the stakes were higher than ever. Every move would be scrutinized, every reaction measured. I moved subtly toward the rival, engaging in casual conversation while letting key pieces of information flow into the room. Hints of achievements, glimpses of influence, carefully phrased anecdotes, all designed to shape perception without revealing strategy. The rival responded cautiously, intrigued yet wary. It was clear he had underestimated my capability, and now he was recalculating. Every subtle nod, every polite laugh, every well-timed comment I offered shifted the balance, and I could feel the room leaning subtly toward my influence. Then, the unexpected figure stepped forward again, close enough for me to hear softly. "Observe closely, Arabella. Influence can shift with a single word, a single gesture, one misstep, and perception changes instantly." I let the words sink in, allowing calm focus to settle deeper within me. This was not intimidation, it was guidance, a challenge to ensure I understood the stakes, and I did. I glanced at Marcus, who offered a faint, encouraging nod. Allies, subtle influence, strategic positioning, I had everything I needed to navigate this stage. But one more misstep, one overlooked glance, could unravel the careful narrative I had constructed. The rival made a move, stepping closer to a group I had just left. It was an attempt to test my reactions, to see if I would falter or reveal insecurity. I remained composed, allowing the flow of the room to guide me, and observed carefully. Every whispered exchange, every subtle glance, every movement of posture carried meaning. Then, almost imperceptibly, the unexpected figure gestured toward a specific guest, someone influential in social circles. Their eyes met mine, silently conveying a message I understood immediately. This was the next phase, influence not just over perception, but over action. I took a deep, controlled breath and moved closer, engaging the guest in conversation. Every phrase, every gesture, every carefully measured laugh reinforced subtle authority. The rival's expression shifted, recognition, recalculation, the subtle unease of someone realizing they were no longer in complete control. Marcus whispered again, "Perfect. Let them see what you've orchestrated without overplaying it. Subtlety is power." I smiled faintly, feeling the thrill of anticipation. The unexpected figure observed, approving of my strategy, and the rival, though clever, could only respond within the framework I had carefully shaped. Every ripple, every reaction, was evidence that perception and influence were now firmly in my hands. But the night was far from over. As the room began to settle into a quiet rhythm again, I felt the subtle shift, the undercurrent of tension thickening once more. Something was coming, something unexpected. Across the room, a familiar voice murmured to a small cluster of guests. The words were soft, almost hidden, but they carried weight. It was a whisper, but one that would ignite a spark of curiosity and doubt among those listening. I caught the flicker of recognition in their eyes, and I knew immediately. The next test was about to unfold. The unexpected figure's eyes met mine once more, a faint smirk of approval tracing their features. "Well done, Arabella," they said softly, audible only to me. "You've controlled perception and shaped influence, but the real test, the one that will reveal true power, is about to begin." I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension and anticipation mingle. This wasn't about appearances, wealth, or charm anymore. It was about influence, strategy, and the ability to remain composed under the quiet pressure of observation. And I was ready. Just as I allowed myself a moment of calm, the room shifted subtly. A movement, a glance, a whisper that no one else noticed but me. The rival had discovered a detail I had hoped remained unnoticed, a piece of information that could tilt the balance in an instant. I froze for a heartbeat, mind racing, then allowed a calm, confident smile to settle across my lips. Challenges had always fueled me. This was no different. The next move would define the night, and I intended to control it fully. The evening had reached a delicate equilibrium. Soft laughter, polite conversation, the occasional clink of glasses. Yet beneath the surface, the subtle battle of influence and perception continued to ripple through the room. Every glance, every whispered comment, every micro-expression carried significance. And I felt it all, poised in the center, fully aware that the next move would define the rest of the night. Marcus remained at my side, a quiet anchor amid the subtle chaos. "The rival is unsettled," he whispered, voice low but certain. "You've shaped perception beautifully, but now it's time to escalate. Influence isn't just observed, it must be demonstrated." I nodded slowly, feeling the thrill of anticipation mix with calm focus. Tonight was no longer a test of appearances or charm. It was a demonstration of control, intelligence, and strategic awareness. Every move I made needed to reinforce my position while subtly challenging the rival. From across the room, I caught the rival watching me, calculating, measuring, attempting to predict my next step. His subtle unease was satisfying, but I knew better than to underestimate him. Experience and observation had taught me that under pressure, people revealed themselves, and tonight, I intended to exploit every nuance. I engaged a small group of influential guests, initiating conversation with deliberate warmth, allowing my words to hint at accomplishments and networks without overt boasting. The rival leaned subtly closer, trying to gauge the truth, while the unexpected figure observed quietly from across the room, approving of the precision with which I navigated the social currents. Then the moment arrived. A quiet announcement, the host inviting a small gathering to a more private area of the lounge, ostensibly to celebrate the evening, but also, I sensed, a chance for whispered exchanges and behind-the-scenes influence. I moved with deliberate composure, Marcus alongside, aware that every step, every gesture, every smile was being evaluated. The rival followed subtly, with measured caution. The unexpected figure remained in view, a silent observer guiding the unfolding dynamics. In the private gathering, the room was smaller, dimly lit, voices softer, every movement amplified by proximity. I noticed it immediately an opportunity to influence, to assert control, and to challenge the rival without overt confrontation. I engaged the host in conversation first, subtly steering the topic toward achievements, connections, and the nature of influence in high society. My words were measured, my tone calm, my presence commanding without arrogance. The rival attempted to interject, testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses or inconsistencies. But I anticipated his moves, allowing him only spaces I had already controlled mentally. Every subtle shift in his posture, every small hesitation, reinforced the effect I was creating. Then an unexpected twist, a whispered comment from one of the guests, something I had not predicted. Arabella Finch has truly been remarkable tonight, and not just in appearance. Her influence is unusual. I caught the flicker of recognition in the rival's eyes. Curiosity, recalculation, a hint of concern. He had underestimated the depth of my capability, the network of influence and subtle authority I had built quietly over years. I allowed a quiet smile, acknowledging the observation without overt confirmation. Subtlety was my weapon, observation my ally. Marcus nodded once, approving, and I knew I was on the correct path. The rival attempted a more direct move, stepping closer and addressing me directly, voice calm but layered with challenge. Arabella, it seems you've mastered tonight's subtleties, but influence, like perception, can shift in an instant. Are you prepared for the consequences of being noticed? I met his gaze steadily, tone deliberate. I am, I replied, and I understand that influence is earned, observed, and carefully maintained. Tonight has been a demonstration, yes, but the true test is sustained impact, lasting impressions that cannot be undone by whispers alone. The rival's expression shifted, surprise, intrigue, and I thought respect. But the game was not over. Across the room, the unexpected figure stepped subtly closer, eyes meeting mine, silently signaling that the next challenge would be more direct. I felt the thrill of anticipation mix with calculated calm. Every observation, every subtle move, every conversation I had orchestrated now converged into a single purpose: to maintain control, assert influence, and navigate the shifting landscape of perception with precision. Then, just as the rival seemed about to speak again, a soft murmur rippled through the small gathering. One of the influential guests leaned slightly forward, revealing a fact, quietly, carefully, about my past achievements, my strategic initiatives, and subtle successes that had gone unnoticed by most. The room's energy shifted immediately. Recognition, curiosity, admiration, and the faintest trace of unease spread among the listeners. The rival's eyes widened slightly, recalculating once more, realizing the depth of influence I had cultivated quietly. I allowed the moment to linger, controlling my expression carefully, letting the impact settle. Every subtle shift reinforced the narrative I had been building all evening. Influence was no longer just observed. It was recognized, respected, and recalculated by those who had once underestimated me. Marcus whispered softly, "Now, maintain focus and observe the next move carefully. This is where perception meets strategy and where true influence is confirmed." I straightened, pulse steady, heart calm but alert. The room seemed to quiet slightly, conversations slowing as attention shifted subtly toward me. I was fully aware of every nuance, every reaction, every subtle recalibration occurring across the small group. And then, just as I allowed a faint, confident smile to settle, the unexpected figure spoke softly, directly to me this time. Arabella Finch, tonight has been a demonstration, but the real measure of influence, perception, and strategy is coming. Are you ready to take the final step? I exhaled slowly, feeling anticipation, excitement, and resolve converge. Challenges had always driven me, and this was no different. Tonight, the subtle power plays, calculated interactions, and strategic maneuvers had led to this moment. I nodded slowly, a quiet confidence radiating, fully aware that the next move would define the balance of influence tonight, and possibly forever. The private lounge had settled into an almost tense quiet, as if the room itself sensed the approaching climax of the night. Every soft laugh, every shifting posture of the guests, every barely perceptible glance carried weight, and I felt it all fully present, fully aware. Every sense heightened by the subtle battle of influence and perception. Marcus leaned close, whispering, "This is it, Arabella, the final move. Everything you've orchestrated leads to this moment. Stay calm, deliberate, and decisive." I nodded slowly, taking a deep breath, letting the calm focus wash over me. Influence was no longer about observation. It was about execution. Every carefully calculated word, every subtle gesture, every expression I had honed tonight would converge into a single, defining act. Across the room, the unexpected figure watched silently, approving yet enigmatic, a reminder that this challenge was more than just social. It was a test of strategy, intellect, and resilience. And the rival, he was unsettled, subtly, but he had not yet seen the full scope of what I could command. I stepped lightly toward a small cluster of influential guests, my presence understated yet commanding. My words were deliberate, crafted to reinforce subtle authority while planting seeds of curiosity and respect. Each sentence revealed competence without arrogance, influence without overt dominance. The rival attempted to interject, his tone controlled but laced with cautious challenge. "Arabella," he said, "you've navigated tonight well, but influence is fleeting. Perception can shift in a heartbeat. Are you prepared for the consequences of being seen?" I met his gaze evenly, voice calm and measured. "I am," I replied, "because true influence is more than perception. It's deliberate, sustained, and reinforced by action, observation, and consistency. Tonight has been a demonstration, but influence endures when it is understood." A flicker of recognition passed over his expression, surprise, recalculation, a hint of respect. He had underestimated my ability to control the narrative and shape perceptions simultaneously. Then subtly, I allowed the moment to shift further. A carefully phrased comment, a minor revelation of achievement, a well-timed gesture, small, almost imperceptible, yet each detail planted a seed of influence. The rival's posture stiffened slightly. He was now reacting, not acting, and that subtle change confirmed the balance was tilting. Marcus whispered, "Perfect. Let them react but remain poised. The final test is about timing, when to assert, when to observe, when to let the momentum flow." I nodded, feeling the thrill of anticipation pulse through me. This was more than social maneuvering. It was strategy in motion, perception under pressure, and influence measured not by loud statements, but by subtle acknowledgement and recalibration. Then the unexpected figure stepped slightly forward, voice soft yet carrying the weight of authority. "Arabella Finch, you've demonstrated control, perception, and strategy. But the ultimate test remains, can you maintain influence when the stakes are personal?" A quiet ripple of tension passed through me, but I remained calm. This was no longer abstract. It was tangible, real, and it required complete mastery of observation, intelligence, and composure. I allowed a subtle smile to settle across my lips, signaling quiet confidence. "I understand," I replied softly, "and I am ready." The figure nodded, acknowledging the controlled assertion, and stepped aside subtly, giving space for the next moment. Across the room, the rival's eyes flicked between me and the other guests, recalculating again, clearly recognizing that he was now reacting to my influence rather than shaping it. I moved deliberately toward a small group that included some of the most influential guests of the evening, allowing my words, gestures, and subtle storytelling to carry weight without overt display. Every glance, Every laugh, every pause was measured, each one reinforcing my position while gently unsettling the rival. Then softly, a revelation emerged, a detail about my achievements, my quiet influence, and my strategic vision that had gone unnoticed until now. It spread subtly, almost silently, like ripples across a pond, reaching the ears of everyone in the small circle. The rival's eyes widened, subtle unease threading through his expression. He had underestimated the depth of my capabilities. I allowed a quiet, controlled pause, letting the room absorb the revelation without comment. Subtlety was my greatest tool. Influence worked best when it appeared natural, unforced, inevitable. Marcus's quiet voice reached me again. Now, Arabella, observe the reactions. They will reveal intent, respect, and recalculation. The final measure of influence is not in words, but in acknowledgement. I watched closely. The rival's posture shifted again, this time subtly yielding. The unexpected figure's eyes met mine briefly, approval clear in their glance. The guests had recalibrated, perceptions subtly altered, influence established without overt domination. Then, just as I felt the tension settle into controlled authority, the unexpected figure leaned close and murmured, audible only to me. "Congratulations, Arabella. You've navigated the social battlefield, challenged assumptions, and asserted influence. But remember, perception is only one layer. The true measure of power is the legacy you leave after the night ends." I exhaled slowly, feeling satisfaction tempered by awareness. The evening had been a subtle war of influence, perception, and strategic intelligence, and Arabella Finch had emerged with quiet triumph. But even in that quiet triumph, I knew the story wasn't finished. Every ripple of influence, every subtle acknowledgement, had consequences beyond this night. The rival would recover, new challenges would emerge, and the balance of perception was never permanent. And yet, for the first time in years, I allowed a small smile of genuine satisfaction. The game had been played, the strategy executed, and the subtle power of observation, patience, and calculated action had prevailed. The evening had shifted into its final hours, and the soft lighting of the lounge cast a golden glow over polished surfaces and elegant gatherings. The murmurs of conversation carried a different weight now, subtle, measured, and tinged with awareness. Everyone present had felt the undercurrents of influence, perception, and subtle power shifting across the room, and they all knew that the night's defining moments had already occurred. I moved through the crowd with calm poise, aware of every gaze, every glance, every whisper. The rival had retreated into careful observation, no longer attempting to dominate but instead recalculating the balance of influence. And the unexpected figure, a quiet observer throughout, now approached with an air of finality, a signal that the ultimate test was imminent. Marcus stayed near, his steady presence reassuring but unobtrusive. "This is it, Arabella," he whispered softly. "The moment to reveal the culmination of influence, strategy, and presence. Every move you make now will solidify your standing tonight and beyond." I took a deep breath, feeling anticipation mingling with controlled excitement. Tonight was more than social maneuvering. It was the demonstration of everything I had learned, cultivated, and orchestrated. Every gesture, every word, every subtle expression would now converge into a moment of revelation. The unexpected figure approached, eyes calm yet commanding. "Arabella Finch," they said softly, almost a murmur that carried clearly through the subtle hush forming in the room. "You have navigated influence, perception, and subtle power with remarkable precision. But the ultimate measure remains, the ability to assert your presence without diminishing others, to command respect and recognition, and to leave a lasting impression." I nodded, steadying myself, letting the weight of those words sink in. This was the moment I had prepared for, the culmination of the careful orchestration, the subtle calculations, and the strategic patience that had defined the evening. I moved toward the center of the room, allowing myself to be seen fully, calm, composed, and quietly confident. The room seemed to sense the shift, conversations softened, attention subtly gravitated toward me, and the previously unassuming power of presence became unmistakable. The rival watched, intrigued and cautious, while the unexpected figure observed, approving yet enigmatic. Marcus whispered softly, "Now, Arabella. Speak, act, or move. Let the culmination of influence take shape." I allowed a small, deliberate smile, my voice calm yet carrying the quiet authority I had honed. "Tonight has been a demonstration of subtle power, perception, and influence," I began, letting each word land deliberately. "But influence is not about overshadowing others. It's about presence, integrity, and the impact of careful observation and action." A ripple passed through the room, recognition, curiosity, and quiet respect. The rival's posture shifted subtly, recalculating again, realizing that influence could be exerted without confrontation or dominance. I continued, carefully weaving subtle references to achievements, network, and strategic insight, without arrogance but with undeniable impact. Every word was a calculated step, each pause a gesture reinforcing control, and every glance a signal of calm authority. Then the unexpected figure spoke softly, directly to me. "Arabella, influence is fleeting without substance. Tonight you have demonstrated the perfect balance, perception, strategy, and presence intertwined. But the final measure is the legacy you leave beyond this moment." I smiled faintly, letting calm confidence radiate. The guests, now fully aware of the subtle power and intelligence at play, shifted in subtle acknowledgement. The rival, now clearly recalibrated, offered a quiet nod, a gesture of respect rather than challenge. I allowed a gentle pause, then stepped aside subtly, signaling the quiet culmination of control and influence. The room had absorbed the demonstration, perception had shifted permanently, influence solidified, and the subtle balance of power achieved. Marcus's quiet voice reached me one final time. "Well done, Arabella. You've navigated perception, challenged assumptions, and executed strategy perfectly. The night's influence is yours to maintain, and your presence leaves an enduring mark." I exhaled slowly, the calm satisfaction of accomplishment settling over me. The evening had been a battlefield of subtlety, strategy, and intelligence, and I had emerged with quiet triumph. And yet, even in this moment of controlled success, I was aware that influence, perception, and strategy were ongoing. The rival would adapt, new challenges would appear, and the subtle currents of high society would always shift. But for tonight, Arabella Finch had proven that intelligence, composure, and strategic presence could define outcomes more powerfully than appearances or assumptions ever could. Across the room, the unexpected figure gave a faint, approving smile, a silent acknowledgement of mastery and growth. The rival, quietly observing, now recalibrated his approach, understanding that Arabella's influence had reached a level that demanded recognition, respect, and strategic consideration. I allowed a final glance around the room, taking in the subtle acknowledgement, quiet respect, and recognition that had been earned through patience, observation, and intelligence. Every move, every calculation, every subtle gesture had culminated in this moment, a testament to the power of quiet strategy and calm authority. As I stepped lightly toward the exit, Marcus beside me, I felt the soft thrill of anticipation for the future. Knowing that influence was not static, that perception was ever shifting, and that the careful cultivation of presence, strategy, and intelligence would continue to shape outcomes long after this night had ended. The soft glow of the lounge lights felt warmer now, calmer, as if the tension that had dominated the evening had finally eased. Guests moved through the room with polite conversation, but the subtle currents of observation, respect, and acknowledgement lingered in the air. Tonight had been more than a gathering, it had been a proving ground. I stood near the edge of the room, taking in the small nods, the faint smiles, and the glances that carried newfound respect. The rival, once a looming presence of subtle challenge, now regarded me with quiet acknowledgement. There was no overt display, no confrontation, only the recognition that influence, carefully cultivated and patiently executed, could not be ignored. Marcus leaned close, a faint smile tracing his lips. "Arabella, you've done it. Every step, every interaction, every calculated pause, all of it culminated perfectly. You've not just navigated the evening, you've mastered it. I nodded, letting a calm satisfaction settle within me. The evening had demanded strategy, intelligence, and subtle influence, and I had delivered. But more importantly, it had been a testament to preparation, patience, and self-belief. Success had not come from appearances or wealth, it had come from deliberate action and quiet confidence. Across the room, the unexpected figure approached, eyes meeting mine with an approving gaze. "Arabella Finch," they said softly, "you've demonstrated perception, influence, and composure beyond expectations. Your presence tonight will leave a lasting impression, and your subtlety has reshaped the room's perception entirely." I allowed a small, serene smile, feeling the weight of their acknowledgement. "Thank you," I replied quietly. Tonight was not just about perception. It was about presence, patience, and understanding that influence is earned, not demanded. A ripple of awareness passed through the guests nearby, as they caught subtle hints of the narrative I had crafted, not through words alone, but through observation, engagement, and quiet authority. The rival, now silent, seemed to absorb the lesson without resistance, recalculating his own approach for the future. Marcus whispered softly, "The true victory is just tonight. It's in the influence you leave behind, the respect you've earned, and the subtle power you've demonstrated without needing to dominate." I exhaled slowly, letting the calm satisfaction fill me. The evening had been a delicate balance, social observation, calculated influence, and strategic presence. Each moment had required careful awareness, and the payoff was subtle yet undeniable. Then, as if the universe itself wanted to seal the evening with quiet affirmation, a small gathering of influential guests approached, offering genuine congratulations, curiosity, and subtle acknowledgement of my achievements. There were no loud declarations, no dramatic gestures, just recognition rooted in observation, respect, and understanding. I allowed myself a moment of reflection, realizing the depth of what had been accomplished. The night had begun with subtle underestimation, whispers of doubt, and challenges cloaked in politeness. And yet, through calm confidence, strategic presence, and subtle intelligence, I had navigated the currents, shaped perception, and earned acknowledgement without ever needing to assert dominance. The rival finally stepped forward, voice calm, expression composed. "Arabella," he said, "you've demonstrated a remarkable command of perception and influence tonight. It's impressive, truly." I met his gaze evenly, offering a polite, quiet smile. "Thank you," I replied. "Tonight has been a demonstration, yes, but influence, when earned carefully, is never fleeting. It endures beyond a single evening." He nodded, subtle respect clear in his posture. The acknowledgement was unspoken yet unmistakable. No confrontation, no bitterness, simply recognition that the balance had shifted, subtly but permanently. The unexpected figure lingered nearby, a faint, approving smile tracing their lips. "Arabella Finch," they murmured, "you have not just navigated tonight's subtle challenges. You have set the foundation for influence, perception, and respect that will endure. Let this be a reminder: strategy, patience, and composure always leave a lasting impact." I allowed a final, serene smile, feeling satisfaction, calm, and quiet triumph converge. Tonight had been about presence, perception, and subtle power. Every step, every calculated gesture, every nuanced engagement had led to this moment: quiet recognition, acknowledgement, and lasting influence. Marcus finally spoke softly, a warm undertone in his voice. "The night is over, Arabella, but the lesson endures. True influence is not in appearances, cars, or status. It's in intelligence, strategy, patience, and composure. You've proven it tonight." I exhaled, a quiet sense of accomplishment settling over me. The room had shifted subtly, perceptions had changed, and influence had been asserted without the need for confrontation or dominance. Arabella Finch had emerged not just as a participant, but as a quiet master of presence, perception, and strategy. And as I stepped toward the exit, the soft hum of conversation and polite laughter following me, I knew that the night had not merely ended. It had transformed into a lasting testament. Influence had been earned, respect had been established, and the subtle power of observation, intelligence, and composure had triumphed over assumptions, whispers, and doubt. Tonight was a reminder. In every corner of life, perception can be guided, influence can be earned, and quiet strategy can achieve outcomes far more enduring than appearances alone. Arabella Finch had arrived, and she had left an indelible mark.